here from Wedding Film School. Today we're going to be talking...
Hey. Good to see you, Craig. Really appreciate the intro. We'll talk to you real soon. See ya. Well, hey everybody, Scott and Pablo here from Wedding Film School. We are excited today to talk all about the GH5 and why we think it's fantastic for wedding filmmakers. And we had to have our good friend Craig Adams back on the Wedding Film School channel. So many of you have followed him for such a long time on this channel, and he'll always be a part of this channel and this community. Even though he's not in weddings, we still give him a hard time about it. But we hope you are doing fantastic. We have had so many questions over the last 18 months since we have been shooting with the GH5 about people asking, is it the best camera for wedding filmmaking? What is the best camera? Is it better than the A7 III? Is it better than the A7S II? The answer is there's no perfect camera, but we want to take this video to talk all about why we think and why we have chosen the GH5 and the GH5S as our main cameras for the last 18 months. So let's get right into it. So first of all, the reason we switched from Sony to Panasonic wasn't because we weren't happy with the image quality from Sony. I really think that they produced a great image, and they still do, and it's still a great camera for filmmaking. There were a few major things that really kind of took us away from the Sony line. One of them, and it's very common to most people using Sony, is that we just had reliability issues. To us, at a wedding, you don't get another chance to film a wedding. And so we had multiple times where it would overheat, or the battery would die too quick, or you just were recording and you forgot to actually set the timer on your watch for that 29 minutes and 59 seconds, and you'd get back to post and realize 30 minutes of the ceremony was cut off and you never got it. Or other shooters would make that issue, and it just got to the point where we were like, man, we can't worry this much about making sure that it works on a wedding day. I will say, since we switched, they've obviously made a lot of improvements in the Sony line, the A9, the A7 III, the A7S III, which will be out soon. They've made a lot of improvements in some of the things that we obviously switched away from, but there are still things that do not compete yet with the GH5. So let's talk first about those things.
So first things first is reliability. These literally just work. There is nothing that has gone wrong with them. They have not overheated. They never go over time. They always get exactly what we need them to get, and they just work from all aspects.
And that's pretty important. I mean, at the end of the day, you could have the greatest camera in the world, but if the thing doesn't record when it's supposed to, it's not that good of a shot. They've been rock solid. We've used them in rain, in snow. We've used them all over the place, and we've never once had anything pop up on the screen that has told us you're in trouble. The second thing we love about it, and we've grown really used to it now that it'd be hard not to have, is 4K 60 frames a second. Now, previously when we were shooting on all Sony, that actually wasn't a big deal to us because we didn't really shoot that much stuff in 60 frames. We've used it a lot more now over the last maybe year or so with weddings and also commercial stuff, but we've grown to love it so much that now I can't imagine having a camera that doesn't have that feature in, because even the short time that we've used a couple of other cameras on shoots, there are so many times we jump to 60 frames and realize, well, we have to jump to 1080. And as a company, we are actually delivering fully in 4K, so it's not like it's a preference we prefer 4K 60, it's we either shoot in 4K 60, or if it doesn't have it, the whole project has to be 1080, which we're not a huge fan of. So the fact that it has 4K 60 and also incredible high frame rate stuff that actually looks great is huge for us. The GH5 will shoot in 180 frames per second in 1080, and will shoot in 240 frames a second on the GH5S. It has to be lit well, as any slow motion does when you have really high shutter speed. You gotta light it, but we tend to light most of the stuff that we do, so it's usually not a big deal. But that high frame rate, the 4K 60, more reasons that we love the GH5.
Another amazing feature about the GH5 is the image stabilization. We had no idea going in when we purchased these that that was gonna be such a huge feature, and now it's kind of hard to even imagine using other cameras without image stabilization as good as the GH5.
We've actually started shooting so many things handheld because of the fact that it is so good. The fact that it's not just good, like it's usable, it's good like you can press a button and use something called IS lock and you'd think you're on a tripod. And you may say to yourself, well, I always use a monopod, I always use a tripod, I don't really need that. Believe me, it's so good that you find uses for it. And there are just times that it's easier to shoot like this, walking around, than it is having any sort of like tripod or monopod near you. There are times when you want a little handheld movement, but you don't want it like shaking, and it's amazing with that, especially paired with the native lenses that are for the GH5, so specifically the Panasonic lenses, and then they have the dual IS2. It's literally mind-blowing how good it actually is. So anyone that knows me knows that I love customizing things. I like to be able to have buttons all over that can be customized to whatever I want. Some people may say it's overkill. I just feel like when you're shooting on a wedding day, there are so many things that you're changing all the time. And there's nothing more frustrating to me than having to go through menus to change things. And what I just realized so fastly when I bought the GH5 was just how many buttons there are, and the fact that every single button can be customized to whatever you want. There are 5 function buttons on the camera that are labeled FN 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are just the FN buttons. Then you have a button here by the lens. That's an additional custom button. You have this entire wheel that has 4 buttons around it that are their own custom buttons. And then you have additional buttons that you can change based on what modes you're actually selected. And then if that's not good enough, they also have buttons up here that are actually your ISO and your white balance as dedicated buttons. So normally you have to route all these additional things for that to be convenient. It's all there. You also have this dial, this dial, this dial. So they're just buttons everywhere, and you actually forget how many there are until you use another camera and you realize you start going hunting. So I use an A6500 for some vlog stuff and what we're shooting this on, and it's amazing how long it takes me to actually do some of the same tasks because I'm always looking through the menus. The best part about it is when you want to reroute what a button does, you simply hold down the button, it brings up the menu and asks what you want it to do. Like, yeah.
Another really cool thing about the buttons, just to mention, is the buttons on the body are in a place that just makes sense. I feel like sometimes we look at other camera bodies and they have weird, the record buttons in like a weird spot, like everything that's it's just well placed. I feel like all the buttons are very
And they're very
well-placed.
tactile.
Yes.
A lot of buttons you feel like you have to kind of really look at to feel, and all of these buttons are so, they're raised above, they just click, they have a nice tactical feel that it's easy to just know what you're pressing, which is great for me. Another perk of the Micro Four Thirds system is the fact that the lenses aren't very big. Now, we could go on and on about obviously what the actual lens's equivalent length is compared to what it actually is labeled as and why the lenses are smaller. A lot of people put hate in the comments about, well, that's because it's not actually a 75, and it doesn't matter. Fact of the matter is the lenses are smaller because they are 2 times the actual focal length equivalent. So a lens like this that is actually 150 millimeter equivalent, yes, it's only actually a 75 millimeter lens, which is why it's this size. But the fact of the matter is I always look at things in equivalent length because I don't really care if it's actually a 75 if I'm shooting 150. So the fact of the matter is the fact that you can have a lens this small at 150 millimeters at f1.8 is just nice. If you come from a Canon or Sony world, you know that the 7200 lens that you buy is literally that big. And while they're great lenses, they look really good, they're nice to use, they're just huge. And I love the fact that you can have small lenses with the Micro Four Thirds system. And these are some of the biggest lenses that you actually can get for it. You can actually get lenses that are a quarter of the size of these that we actually used to use. We'll talk about lenses in a little bit, but you can just get an outstanding image quality with a very small form factor.
One other thing that we love about the GH5s is the fact that it has a screen that is actually usable. So we shoot a lot of things obviously outdoors with very, very harsh sun, and it's hard sometimes to see what you're seeing. And I think when you're in film, that's super important. And so the fact that this is actually usable, the fact that it rotates in whatever direction you want it to, including at yourself if you're a vlogger, but obviously for film, it's important to see exactly what it is that you're shooting so that you can get the best result possible. And these things really do that for us.
We've gotten so used to now of kind of our standard position being right in front of us while we're holding the camera to the side. And it's been so nice to do that there are times I recently had to shoot with someone and I was second shooting and using a Canon and the screen was just like this and that was it. And I couldn't believe how often I used to have to like try to look at the screen. And I just love the fact that it will rotate any direction for you. So whether you're shooting down, looking at it, whether you're shooting up and being able to look at it, it's just really, really nice. And the fact that it actually is a quality screen matters because you have to be able to see what you're shooting. And you have to know that what you're seeing is actually what you're going to get. I found them to be pretty accurate to what actually comes out on the screen, and that's important to me. So let's talk about battery life, another thing that should be important to you in wedding filmmaking. I will say Sony has absolutely improved their new batteries. So we're comparing it to the previous little NP50 batteries that were basically worthless. They have absolutely improved those, so without question they're much closer now to what the GH5 is, but we get over 2 hours of shooting in 4K on the GH5. And if you're coming from any other system other than Panasonic, you're probably thinking that that's pretty good, because it is. We used to get maybe an hour of 4K shooting. That's if it didn't like start on fire while we actually were holding it in our hands. It's really nice because the batteries last in 4K, and there are times that we're shooting a ceremony and letting it run for an hour and 20 minutes, and the battery will lose half of the battery letting it just sit there. And that's great for us, because when I set a camera up and I hit record, I want it to keep recording. And not only the actual overheating side, but you got to make sure the battery lasts, and that's something that has been game-changing for us for ceremonies, which leads us to the next point of one of the best reasons I think this camera is great for wedding filmmakers or even event filmmakers: unlimited recording time. Yes. Now, unless you are a C100, C200, C300, or FS5 type shooter, unlimited recording time is not something you're probably used to. You're used to a 29-minute, 59-second limit. Now, if you are used to that, you know that what it ultimately means is that it's not very enjoyable. It's not nice if you're in a ceremony, especially a Catholic ceremony like is common in the United States. Some of these ceremonies are 90 minutes long. And if they're 90 minutes long, that means at 3 separate times in the ceremony, you have to go to all the cameras and hit record, or communicate with your second shooter. I'm gonna stop this one, don't stop this one, or hey, I need to stop this, have you done the one? We have missed shots. We have had shooters miss shots. We have missed the first 10 minutes or last 10 minutes of something because we forgot that we were trying to remember what camera was at what. It's just a nuisance.
It even really matters too when you're doing talking head stuff, when you have like 3 cameras running and you want to do an interview and you don't want to be, cutting the people off maybe 27 minutes into the interview. It's like there's so many scenarios where having unlimited recording time is so huge, and the GH5 just has not failed once.
Another big thing for weddings that I think is huge, and really for any filmmaking, is dual SD card slots. Now, most of the companies these days are doing that, so it's not like that's a game changer, but there are still camera companies that are putting out cameras without dual SD slots, and I love it. Not only can you set it as a backup source so that you always have it recording in 2 places, you can just do relay recording, so the one gets full, the next one goes into the next space, and it's nice. It's kind of an additional backup source and an additional way that if you for some reason forgot to put the SD card back in the camera after you imported, which we've all done at times, you still got another one in there. We choose to have 128 gigs in both slots, giving us 256 gigs total, which gives us roughly 6 hours of recording time in 4K 24 frames in 8-bit, and roughly 4 hours of recording time in 4K 24 10-bit, which we don't even need to jump into that, but did I mention 4K 10-bit? I mean, we could just keep going on and on. Hopefully you see what we're trying to get at here. The camera's outstanding. So there are a few people and a few situations that I don't think the GH5 are the best for wedding filmmaking, and we want to be honest about those things and talk about it. Number 1, low light. These things were not designed for great low light. They're a micro four thirds sensor, meaning it's a much smaller sensor than full frame or even the APS-C stuff, so without question they struggle in low light. For us, it's not a big deal whatsoever because we light everything. The highest ISO we probably ever go on a wedding day is 800, 1200 maybe, max, yeah, because we light things. And now we know that a lot of you watching this don't light ceremonies, don't light speeches, don't light first dances, and if that's the case, you may want to consider a different option because it is struggled in low light. Now, on the topic of low light, there is an option with the GH5 line called the GH5S. This one is absolutely outstanding in low light as well, but a couple things to note about this. While this will get you much better low light and absolutely usable low light in any condition, there are things that this doesn't have, like the image stabilization that we talked about. But there are more things that this also does have. This has 240 frames a second in slow-mo. It still has your 4K 60, your unlimited recording time, a great screen, the same body, the same feel, the same lenses. Everything about it is still outstanding. The only thing you lose in this is the image stabilization. As we said, we love the image stabilization, which is why we don't have 3 GH5Ss. We use this primarily for gimbal work when we have high aperture stuff, where if we're doing something at f4 or f8 because we want things to be all in focus, well, when you're at that aperture, you're gonna need to be in a higher ISO. And if you need to be in a higher ISO, you don't want to necessarily be in the GH5. See what I mean there?
Another thing about the GH5 that's not the strongest is the autofocus. And I think a lot of you know that already to begin with, that it wasn't made for autofocus. If you're a filmmaker, like a lot of you watching, obviously you're gonna be behind the camera, so manual focus is completely fine. And in our scenario, that's all we use on a wedding day.
But it is important to know that, because if you are someone that has grown to love Sony autofocus or Canon autofocus and you do use it quite a bit, this is going to be something you have to adjust to, because you do not want to rely on this for autofocus. I've done tons of videos on this topic. I have found ways to do it and make it work decently for certain situations. But when a bride is coming down the aisle, we rack focus with her. And we're used to doing it. We get the results we want. And I never have to blame a camera on doing it. If you're someone that is strong into gimbal work and autofocus is huge for that, this may not be the camera for you as well. We at times have used other cameras for gimbal work, or you just got to get used to keeping a distance of what you're focused on and you have no problems whatsoever. But things to keep in mind for sure. So we choose to use all Olympus lenses except for our wide angle, which is a Voigtlander lens. Now the reason we choose Olympus is because for what we get out of the lenses, plus some of the capabilities that they have the other lenses don't, we feel like it's the best overall lens for how we use the camera. Now a couple big factors into that, but primarily in our main lenses, the 45mm and the 25mm, we love the fact that they have a focus clutch. Now, what the focus clutch allows you to do is when you are clutched back, you have a true manual focus with a start and a stop for your focus. Now, anyone using manual focus knows that that's how you want it to be. Focus by wire is really annoying. You can't predict it. It's annoying and it's not really usable in manual focus. We love having a true manual focus. The problem is when you have a true manual focus and a manual focus only lens, like something in the Voigtlander, the problem is you actually lose out on any autofocus capabilities with the camera. Now, we talked about that autofocus isn't great on the camera, and it's not. But what we actually mean is that continuous autofocus on the GH5 is not good. The actual autofocus on the camera is completely fine. So here's where it's huge for us. With a manual only lens like this, our only option is manual focus. For a wide angle like what we use with this Voigtlander, no problem. But for the way that we have our cameras set up, this button on the back here that is at the thumb, this button right here, that one, yeah. We have that button routed as what's called AF on, which basically means when we press that button, whatever is in the little grid that we've determined that we want it to focus on, it immediately grabs focus and then it stays in manual. Now you wouldn't believe how convenient that is, because it will actually focus very quickly when you press that button. But then what's nice is it stays in manual focus. Now if you have a fully manual focus lens, it will not do that. The Olympus is, because they have the focus clutch, when you're clutched back, you have true manual focus. When you're clutched in, you have a usable focus with the camera. And only these lenses kind of offer that clutch, and I absolutely love them for that. Also, the Olympus lenses are water sealed, the M Zuiko Pro lenses that we have, and for us that's huge. Weddings are not the only thing we do, so it's important to be able to trust that they won't stop working in the rain. So that's big for us. So here's each lens and how we actually use them. Most times on a wedding day, I act as the A shooter, he acts the B shooter, not in terms of who's better, but just in terms of what roles we actually have to shoot. So as the A shooter, whoever's shooting A that day is what we call it, my main thing is bride prep. It's gonna be some of the detail shots. It's gonna be some of the main shots for speeches, the main shots for some of the entrances, all that kind of stuff. My main lens is the Olympus 45 1.2. So it's essentially a 90mm equivalent. It's a 1.2 aperture, so it's great for just getting really, really good looking depth of fields. or bokeh, as like a lot of people like to call it. I absolutely love this lens. I recently added this to the kit. After using the 25 for a while, I decided for what I'm normally shooting in bride prep that a 45 is okay, because I'm never really worried about it being too tight. Then I always carry the 10.5 with me on the side if I need a little bit wider of an area. But I love it. This will be my main lens throughout the day for all bridal prep stuff. It'll be used sometime for speeches, depending on how tight it is. It'll be used for maybe some random shots of tables, detail stuff. It's just a beautiful, beautiful focal length. It's just really, really creamy bokeh and insanely sharp, but not like the artificial bad looking sharp, just really, really nice.
And then for me, my main lens is the 25mm 1.2 Olympus lens. I absolutely love this lens for everything that I need for groom prep. I use it for, like he was saying, I'm the bee shooter a lot of the time, so for everything else during the day, this is a great, great lens, and it also really works well for a lot of general establishing shots as well.
It's a 50mm equivalent, so 25 1.2 is the 50mm equivalent, 45 is a 90mm equivalent. So it gives you a little wider, because for a while we were swapped, and you had the 45, but in most of the areas it was tighter for you, because in some of the groom prep you don't have as much room.
Right.
Bride prep tends to be bigger areas, so it allows you to kind of get further back and get the shots you want. Then our second lenses that we use, and we have two of them that are identical, are the Olympus 75mm 1.8s, which are 150mm equivalent. Plain and simple, we use this for two main things. Number one, it's our two ceremony angles on the sides. So one is tight on the bride, one is tight on the groom. And then the other time we use it is mostly for things like speeches and portrait stuff with the couple. This produces just a beautiful, beautiful compressed image on the couple, since this is more of the equivalent of what an 85 actually is to people, but it's at 150mm equivalent. It allows us to really get intimate with the couple without being right up in their grill. We are all about kind of hiding on a wedding day. We want people to forget we're there, and the best shots we get are always the ones that they don't really know where we're even shooting them from. It just is beautiful. So Pablo uses that basically the entire time with portrait session, and when we're having just sessions specifically with the couple. And our only other lens is a Voigtlander 10.5mm, which is the equivalent of a 21mm, and this is an f/0.95, and honestly, I could get rid of this lens if it wasn't for the fact that every once in a while I use it for vlogging. It's a really good lens, but there are just more times than not that I'm not really crazy about the quality that I get from the Voigtlander lenses. Before this whole lineup happened, we went to all Voigtlanders, and while I love the build quality, I think they're built unbelievably well and they're so comfortable to use, I just feel like they aren't as sharp as the Olympus lenses we have now. I felt like we would look at them and kind of, they naturally felt like they had like a tilt shift effect to them, which I really don't want for a wedding. And we just weren't crazy about them. But I could get rid of this lens if it wasn't for the fact that I do use it for some other things. I would recommend a lens like this if you are using it for a gimbal, because a 21mm at f/0.95 just gets you nice depth of field if you're close up on the couple. And it's just a great lens. It's built well. It's heavier than all the lenses we have. Great build quality, nice quality. I just like the Olympuses better. That's just my preference. So last thing we'll answer about lenses that everyone always asks is, do we use any of the speed booster adapters with Canon lenses? We've chosen not to. I know a lot of people that do. They use the Sigma 18-35 as a pretty common lens. Great lens. I see great quality from it. I've never been a big fan of adapters. I feel like it's one more place that you can have a failure, whether it's between the camera communicating with the lens, whether it's light leaks, which a lot of people have issues with adapters, whatever it is. I just don't want another thing between my glass and the camera. So I choose to just use native stuff, and that's always been how I am. So when I was all Canon, I shot all Canon lenses. When I was Sony, I shot all Sony lenses. When I'm Panasonic, I shoot all Micro Four Thirds lenses, and they have to be native. If they require an adapter, I find a different option. That's just my preference. People love the 18-35. I don't. And just in case you want to know, this is not sponsored in any way. I really wish it was, because the new full frames were just announced, and I would love for them to send me them so I could tell you about them as well. But until then, I can't buy all new stuff with new glass and everything, so we'll just have to see. But if you know me, you know that nothing is guaranteed. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon, Wedding Film School.